Good morning and welcome to Penn Vicarage. Hoping this finds you well and cheerful today, and hope you're looking forward to a lovely day. And it's sunny, I can see in the window behind you. Apart from the sunshine today, something else I'm looking forward to this weekend is worship in our church. We are open for business. We have a service at 5:30 Saturday evening, 8 o'clock Sunday morning according to Book of Prayer, and 10 o'clock at St Bart's, and also 11:45 and stands. And we weren't full last weekend, so if you'd like to come, we'd love to see you. Would be really, really welcome in our church over the weekend. As I say, do come along, do go along with the kind of safety procedures, do come along with charity and a sense of humour, and we'll have another good weekend this weekend. Hope to see lots of you in church. Now, our reading today is a classic Sunday school favourite. It's the story of the little man called Zacchaeus. And the context is that Jesus is, as I said yesterday, picking up from yesterday's reading, he's on his way to Jerusalem. He's now reaching a place called Jericho. Now, Jericho, as I said yesterday, is basically an oasis in the desert, and it's very, very close to Jerusalem. So we're not far away now from his entry into Jerusalem. Now, before we start, I want to give you just a little bit of background about tax collectors. Tax collectors were hated in those days. And despite what Monty Python may think, it wasn't because, they're raising money for buildings and bridges and that sort of stuff. I mean, one level, taxes, aren't they? But people kind of understand they've got to be paid. The reason that tax collectors were hated is because they were raising money for the occupied power. The people of God had been taken over by the Romans, and tax collectors were raising money for the hated occupying power. That's one thing. So it was considered like being a tax collector was raising money for the enemy, like a treachery thing. And the other thing, of course, is that the coins had the picture of the emperor on. And in those days, according to the second commandment, any pictures, images were forbidden. So that money was considered blasphemous, and you were dirty if you touched it. So partly because they were selling out to the enemy, and partly because the money was blasphemous, tax collectors were hated. And Zacchaeus, although he was a little man in stature, was a very, very big tax collector. He was the top man in the area, because he wasn't just a tax collector, he was the boss man. He was the arch tax collector, you might say. He was the top man. And this is the person Jesus encounters on the way in Jericho. And here's what happens. It's Luke's Gospel, chapter 19, and I'm reading verses 1 to 10. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble and said, "He has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor, and if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is the son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost." And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, I've learned a lot this week. And I'm going to tell you now, the message I'm about to give you is very, very different to the message I thought I'd be giving you about this reading 24 hours ago. I've had a complete rethink about it. I always thought that the story was principally about Zacchaeus, and that Zacchaeus was this lost man who somehow knew his need of God and knew he needed Jesus, and when Jesus came, he was desperate to see him, so he climbed a sycamore tree so he can get a bird's eye view, and not to be outdone, he was climb the tree, and so on and so on and so on. And when he met Jesus, he was so keen to demonstrate his new faith that he gave all of his money away, and so on. And the emphasis was always about Zacchaeus. And the message was going to be that whoever you are, seek Jesus, and you'll find him, and you'll find salvation. Now that's true, I don't dispute any of that. But I want to ask the question this morning, and it struck me last night. In this story, who is it who does the seeking? We tend to think that it's Zacchaeus who seeks Jesus. But I've had a bit of a rethink. And partly because the very end of the verse, it says, "For the Son of Man came to seek out and save the lost." So I've come to the conclusion it's not principally about Zacchaeus seeking Jesus. I think this story is actually about Jesus seeking Zacchaeus. Because actually, Zacchaeus does climb the tree, but Jesus, he's on his way to something really, really big. So if anybody had a reason to be distracted on this journey, it was Jesus. And yet Jesus comes into town. He somehow knows Zacchaeus' name. He stops. He calls Zacchaeus down and invites him to his house, stays there, talks to him before he moves on. So who is it doing the seeking? It's not just Zacchaeus seeking Jesus. I think this story is principally about Jesus seeking Zacchaeus. And I think it makes a lot more sense because the Son of Man did come. Jesus did come to seek out and to save the lost. It's not just the lost that seek Jesus. Jesus seeks us. And so why would Zacchaeus give half his money away? Why would salvation enter his house? Well, I strongly suspect that for Zacchaeus, it would have been, of all the people Jesus could have had, for some reason, he picked little me, you know? He could have picked somebody who was much more popular, but he picked me. He could have picked somebody who everyone looked up to and respected, but he picked me. Despite everything, of all the people Jesus could have picked in the whole of Jericho, Jesus picked my house to come and stay, despite the fact that no one likes me, despite the fact that I won't have any real friends, despite the fact that in lots of ways I'm lost, he must have thought. Jesus still picked my house, Zacchaeus' house, to come to. And I think that must have been such an incredible surprise to Zacchaeus, that of all the people Jesus could have picked, he picked his house to go to. And because actually, it's not just us that seek Jesus. Actually, the good news is that Jesus picks you and me. And I think that's a phenomenal thing because, you know, I think it's incredible that Jesus picked me. And I want you to know that Jesus picks you. And yes, there are a lot of people he could have picked. And yes, he knows the score. He knows everything that's happening. He knows all our faults, our failings, as well as our strengths and our abilities. But he picks you and me. Jesus once said, "You did not choose me, but I chose you." We are a chosen people. God has chosen me, and God has chosen you. And I think that is why salvation entered Zacchaeus' house that day, because the Son of Man came to seek us. Jesus seeks and wants you and me. So, being a chosen person like you are, have a lovely day.